Steve Pieczenik joins us today, and you've got the chessboard behind you today. I think that is very symbolic of where we stand in the fight for America right now, how they're trying to move racism around to put us in checkmate.
Let me put it this way. I'm not surprised this occurred. This is something we talked about a year ago or so. I said there would be groups that would be pitted against us. Now, who's us and who's they? Number one, Richard Spencer grew up in Boston. His father is an ophthalmologist, went to all these private schools and colleges, never worked a day in his life. And he becomes, quote, the head of the Nazi party, or whatever you want to call it, the alternative right. This is a man who contrived the history that he belongs to Montana. I've lived in Montana. We don't particularly like him in Montana. His mother spoiled him. His father spoiled him. And then he creates, quote, a group. He's never worked a day in his life. He has no idea of what a daily worker is about. And he tried to come here, University of Florida in Gainesville. I stopped him, and a bunch of other people stopped him. So we have these intellectuals on the left, so to speak, and on the right. On the left, I have Signer, a Jewish kid, went to University of Virginia. Both of them went to the University of Virginia, both intellectuals. None of them have ever been in anything other than what they want, which is self-aggrandizement, increased narcissism, and make themselves prominent. Spencer didn't do anything in his life that's worthy of anything. He's a spoiled little brat. And Signer's a spoiled little brat who wants to go to politics and prose on Connecticut Avenue and teach nonfiction. So you have these two spoiled little brats coming together with the most ridiculous outfits I've ever seen, where you have fully trained and fully equipped soldiers coming down with lanterns or flares as if this was a Nazi rally. First of all, neither one understands what the Nazi rally was about. Secondly, most of them don't understand that Hitler really had about 100,000 Jews in his army. I didn't make this up. Hitler's two major field commanders and the Luftwaffe, the Blitzkrieg, were full Jews out of 5. Hitler's right-hand man, Heydrich, who was in charge of the extermination of Jews, was a Jew from Austria. So history is missing in all of this. On the left, they forgot that they gave birth to eugenics in Germany. It was the left, particularly Stanford University, University of the Rockefeller University, and Harvard, who gave the grants that eventually went to Mengele to do the eugenics and eugenics experiments. Also, it was Margaret Sanger who inspired everybody to get rid of any child that was not adaptive.
We'll be right back with more on The Alex Jones Show. Fund independent media that gets people like Dr. Steve Pieczenik on to break down the, I would say, collusion. I would say behind-the-door collusion between the mayor of Charlottesville and Richard Spencer. Dr. Pieczenik, where you left off.
I would agree with you. There is a clear collusion. Both of the men were trained in the same place as the University of Virginia. They're both highly educated. They both owe their allegiance to their specific parties. In the case of Spencer, he just made up some nonsensical party called the Nazis, or the alternative right, or alternative media. He didn't create the expression alternative media. Neither did Hillary. It was really created here on the Alex Jones Show when we did it about 12, 14 years ago, where we were the new right or the new Republicans because we broke away on 9/11. That's what nobody really understood. This is a still carryover in terms of the Republican Party, or we who were disillusioned with the Bushes and others, that we wanted to have our own specific party, and Alex was the forefront of it. In terms of the left, I mean, they have been pathetic. It's still part of the Podesta group. It's still part of the, the fascism of the left. When you create a tight group and they're always working to create agitation, propaganda, that's the beginning of fascism on both sides. And probably the closest analogy historically to this would be the Weimar Republic in the 1920s, when you had the fascist left and the so-called fascist right coming together, and in between you had this a painter or a theoretical painter who didn't get into art school named Hitler came to power. Now, this is highly contrived. Whoever's involved has to be involved with some of the elements of the FBI and some of the elements of the CIA. Why do I say that? Richard Spencer lives in Arlington, Virginia. He was married to a former Russian or Russian-American. The Russian-American, it turns out, studied U.S. foreign policy, international relations, and guess what? The Soviet Union. By definition, she was and still is probably the CIA. In return, you have Podesta Group, you've got Singer or Signer, as he calls himself. He was involved in a lot of education as well, University of Virginia, as was Spencer. So both come out of the same background, intellectual, spoiled, elitist. None of them have ever really worked. None of them created a job. And both decided to get into the business of agitation propaganda. In turn, you have the FBI, who's completely penetrated the KKK. There's no notion there is any KKK. As usual, Alex is correct. And years ago, I remember Maurice Dees of the Southern Poverty Law Center, whom I helped out about 20, 30 years ago and gave him some operatives and some money to tell him to infiltrate it, and also we told the FBI to get rid of the KKK. So the KKK doesn't exist, and as Alex pointed out, the absurdity of having a black or a brown individual in the KKK makes it even more absurd. The fact that you have men dressed up in full combat gear walking with flames is also absurd. So this was all highly contrived by whatever, the deep state, the FBI, the agency, in order to create strategic tension. Now, Trump handled this very well. Where the problem lies for Trump is very simply that he's answering all the questions right on the mark, but he's getting trapped in this strategic...
That's Dr. Steve Pieczenik. We'll be right back with more from him, more of the breakdown on Charlottesville, and your phone calls. Dr. Steve Pieczenik has broken this down in the previous segments. He's wrote about it on his website, stevepieczenik.com. Charlottesville stage confrontation. He broke down the collusion with Michael Signer and Richard Spencer, a professional LARPer by my estimation. But I want to hear your take on a couple other angles, Dr. Pieczenik. 3 angles I want to hear your take on. 1, what happened to the police helicopter and how come nobody is asking that question? No coverage on that. 2, what do you think about the people that attacked the car that ended up driving over people and killing one woman? And what do you think about the car driver able to speed out of there in a jiffy like a professional driver and get out of the scene, and then police are able to apprehend him later? Let's start with the police helicopter. What are your thoughts on that?
I really don't know. What I do know is that beforehand, I was shocked that there was no police protection for anybody, either on the right or the left. This was a trap. There was no question this was a setup. This should have been seen very quickly by whoever the marchers were, particularly on the alternative right or Spencer. They didn't pick this up, and they should have picked it up because there was no police protection as they came in, and then they were shuttled into a barricade. The second issue about the car or, the helicopter, I really do not know what happened. I'm sorry. I mean, I know UVA police. Some of them are very good. Some of them are, they do their job. Virginia tends to have a very strict moral code and a very strict system of operation for their state troopers and all of their policemen. So they're well trained. As for the Charlottesville police, I have no idea why they were not there. Most probably the mayor told them not to be there. And if I know Terry McAuliffe, who's been the political slime bag since he's been with the Clintons for over 20 years, there's no question in my mind that he was part of this setup in order to create the confrontation that he needed in order to create a distraction away from either Hillary Clinton, the investigations going on, but Debbie Wasserman Schultz. So this had a lot of overtones to distraction, denial, and distortion. It's an old intelligence technique, but it's not working that well. And in terms of the driver, they said he was schizophrenic. They said he was on medication. I'm a little bit surprised that he was brought into the Army, given the fact he was schizophrenic. I'm not surprised the Army threw him out within 4 months. And then he immediately went to whatever organization that he said he was pro-Nazi. Most people have no idea what the Nazis really were, or who they were, and how they fought. It just sounds great, and they have no idea what the underlying basis was for National Socialism. If he's crazy, then I think he should be evaluated, and then he should be either placed in a psychiatric hospital, which I would not recommend, since I would say he was quite sane according to the McNaughton ruling. In other words, he knew exactly what he was doing, and he should be prosecuted accordingly and tried for murder. And whether you want to call it terrorism or intentional murder, there's no question in my mind he's a murderer. As a result, the prosecution on a federal level has to be consistent with intentional murder and no mitigating circumstance. I do not say he was a schizophrenic at that point.
I completely agree, and it's pretty obvious that anybody in their right mind would completely condemn a psychopath mauling people down in a car. But I'm just curious, how come there's been no talk in the media or anyone about the people that were beating his car, the people that were hitting his car with bats? I mean, this is the kind of thing that if we don't stop that, you could have another similar incident.
Well, what you've got here, with all due respect, when we start getting into the weeds of the garden, what you're finding out is this is just the small elements of agitation propaganda. It doesn't matter. Once the confrontation occurs and once there's a decision to have these two elements collude together, as you would say, anything is possible after that. And basically the free-for-all becomes part of the agitation propaganda. So you didn't have police intervening at the right time. You didn't have any sense of civil order. The governor really was totally inept, as one would expect of Terry McAuliffe, and the Charlottesville mayor is totally inept. Again, I mean, he's very much of a kind of elitist, pansy type, exactly like Richard Spencer. These are not people who are serious. Will it happen again? Maybe, but I'll give you one idea that here in the University of Florida in Gainesville, we just turned down Spencer's request to say that he wants to talk about free speech. This is not about free speech. Contrary to what anybody thought, this is about agitation propaganda. So the First Amendment does not apply either to the alternative left or the alternative right. When you're intending to come into an agitation propaganda and confrontation, there's no lawyer in the world that could rationalize that this is free speech. It's just not.
Well, and you know what's going to happen? Element. The ACLU is going to come in and probably say that, how dare you not let Richard Spencer have his speech, because that's what they did over the weekend in Charlottesville.
That's fine. I've funded the ACLU. I don't think that they're necessarily the most sophisticated organization. I don't think they really understand anything in the intelligence world in terms of agitation propaganda. They don't understand denial distraction. They work on a judicial system which may not be relevant to today's times. And I respect what they've done in the past, but I don't necessarily agree that premeditated confrontation is the right to speech, and that's not a First Amendment right.
And this is how they're trying to stage the Civil War, at least in my opinion, to clash these two groups against one another. We're now joined also by Alex Jones, so Dr. Steve Pieczenik on the line. Alex Jones with us now. I'm Owen Schroyer, kind of playing traffic cop here. Alex, welcome back to the program.
You bet. I'm on a working vacation, but actually out here working on several things while I'm in Seattle with some family, but I was going to go on a hike here in a few minutes. That's why I'm in my regular T-shirt. But I was getting in the car to drive to the mountain, and I'm listening to you guys on the iPhone app. And what Dr. Pieczenik was saying was so important. I pulled back up, went back up in the hotel because I happen to know the history of the WTO because I had a reporter out here at the time. I bought a bunch of the raw footage from the 1999 demonstration against the WTO. And that was back when the left was halfway against globalism and unelected groups taking over. But that so concerned the globalists, they spent all this money coming in to take it over and then to start branding it in 2000 as racist. So they began to fund the white supremacist groups and others that have been well known. And even Texas Monthly's written cover page articles about the FBI creating fake Klan groups. As Dr. Pieczenik was saying, intelligence agencies setting them up, Oklahoma City using German intelligence, Southern Poverty Law Center. It goes on and on. But there I am yesterday in Seattle, down on the waterfront at the old market that's there, and they have a shop there that was selling old posters and one-of-a-kind photos and old magazines. So I was in there buying my mom some old, Time Life book type stuff, fact, maybe Zimmerman, bring me a few of those over here. And I saw this because I remember getting sent a copy of this by a listener, but a smaller handbill size, back in 1999. But I was actually able to buy the one-of-a-kind they had. They said, yeah, nobody ever even wanted it. Stop the WTO. And here it is. And it says right there, agitprop. And it talks about what they were doing. Peaceful people out here peacefully demonstrating against the World Trade Organization transferring our sovereignty. And they can't have that. So then they posed 50 people who were government house protected, trained in Oregon by big foundations to come in, be violent, attack police, the police stand down, then they come in the next day, attack the peaceful crowds because the public had already seen that. And that's the standard deal. And you heard what he was exposing with Spencer and the guy's wife and the whole background. It's all complete cutouts. They don't even try to hide any of this stuff. And this is Steve Pieczenik, who ran the psychological operations, the Camp David Accords back when he was younger and all those other things. And this is a real player telling folks this is going on. So I want him to briefly speak about the players now he thinks that are involved and what he thinks they're going to hit us with next, because they won't let Trump bring us together around the economy or anything. They just keep hammering. A lot of folks aren't buying it, so they're using fake polls again to make it sound like he's losing steam. But I had to come back because people don't know what agitprop and all this is. They don't understand that this is really going on. It's what they train universities for. Even the low-level people involved know they're involved. They're almost all doctorate students recruited in by foundations as front groups. And the public needs to understand that when I say they caught leftist Jewish individuals attacking synagogues this year to blame Trump, they got caught. It was in the Washington Post, but no one gives it coverage. Or when they catch leftist groups doing it, they just try to spin it, hoping we're all ignorant, but less and less it's working. So I'm going to get off here and let Dr. Pieczenik finish, then let you go to calls ahead of our exclusive interview that we haven't aired yet of Milo. This is the taped interview. But I wanted to just come back because he mentioned agitprop. I want folks to know this is what you're actually hearing. This is the reality of what they're doing. Please continue.
Alex, as usual, you're right on the button, and so is Owen. What agitation propaganda is, it's an old technique that we've used for centuries. Actually, the Germans used it, the Russians use it. Everybody uses it in order to create a distraction. I mean, you have Trotsky, you have Lenin. Lenin's right-hand man was Trotsky. What was he famous for? He was famous for coming in, creating agitation, and then making sure that the two elements, the White Russians, the Soviets, would attack each other, and therefore they could neutralize both of them and eventually take over as the Communist Party. Trotsky's mistake was
fish in the James Bond From Russia with Love. It's like the fish, where they get the two Siamese fighting fish to almost kill each other, then the one's almost dead and the new one can come in and take him out.
Again, Alex hit it on the head. One of the reasons I always love to come on the show is because Alex knows a lot, and he doesn't reveal it, but it's true. But like the Russians and like Trotsky, what happened to Trotsky was he insulted Stalin, and then Stalin had a retribution, which was an axe in Trotsky's head. Now, this is exactly what will happen to Spencer, this will happen to Signer, and this will happen to the individuals who are involved. The reason for that is very simple. Those of us who know the deep state, who know everything about agitprop, we know exactly how it's created, where it comes from, who's funding it. We'll make sure that these leaders, and this is a warning to them, and I have rarely missed my warnings, that they are in trouble, they are in danger now of being killed by their very own people who set them up. Whether it's the FBI, the CIA, or whatever foundations you want to talk about, they will not be able to continue. Now, why do I say this? Because when Spencer went up to Montana, and Montana he went to is a very elegant, rich area, Whitefish, where you go sailing, you go fishing. He didn't go into Montana to work. He didn't work a day in the lumber camps. He never worked a day creating a business. I had 4 businesses in Montana. This is a spoiled child, literally a child whose mother got into fights with people in Montana. And I called up my friends, the conservative Republicans in Montana, and they say, this is a brat. And so he was picked up because he is a brat. He's easily controlled. He has nothing to do with Semitism or anti-Semitism. He's just a jerk who has nothing to do, and he's lazy. The same thing with Signer's a Jewish kid who's a schlep. He never worked a day in his life. He was part of the transition group under Obama. So what happens is the deep state, some of us come in, we pick each one of these guys, we tell them they're important, we fund them money, and then we say, go at each other. Now, the big difference here is what Alex said and what Trump said. Number one, let me be clear about our Civil War. Our Civil War was never, but never about slavery. It was always about money and the increased domination of the Industrial Revolution in the North. And we wanted the Missouri River, we wanted the Mississippi, we wanted New Orleans. Similarly, this new war will not be a civil war because Abraham Lincoln was not that stupid, but he was not that healthy, nor did he care about blacks. Let me be very clear. If you look at the statements that Abraham Lincoln made, he said, blacks are inferior. I don't want them in the America. I want them deposed and sent over to Liberia. In fact, Lincoln mandated that Maryland, Delaware, Missouri must be slave states in order to make sure the political elite could control the South and then eventually could do what he wanted. Lincoln had Marfan syndrome. He was a bipolar individual. He was totally nasty depressed. So if you want to go to any statue where a man hated blacks, literally, you look at his statements that he made about blacks, they were inferior, they should never come to America, we'll send them back to Liberia, then take away the Abraham Lincoln Monument. I don't have a problem with that. I've always resented that I had to have the propaganda from the North that Lincoln was a great president. He was one of our worst presidents. Just like John F. Kennedy, he was mentally ill. He had no idea what he wanted, except he was repressive. He was a fascist. He arrested all of the judges in Maryland, all of the journalists, and then created auto-genocide, where 950,000 boys were killing each other. Now, you tell me that's a great president, and I want to hear the press retaliate with any sense of history. So what do we have in academia? We have this notion that Lincoln was one of our greatest presidents. Absolute nonsense. Doris Goodwin, who was the writer about Lincoln, was the same woman who seduced LBJ on his biography. So you have academia involved in the polarization of a country. You have professors who are tenured who have no idea what the history is about. You have PhD students who continue just propagating nonsense. And there's no history or a basis of facts. We don't talk about the history of America. We don't talk about the fact that Lincoln was very close to kind of a Pol Pot who made sure that we destroyed the entire South in order to get railroads, in order to get Mississippi, in order to get New Orleans. He didn't give a damn about the blacks. We had white slavery coming in. Ask every Irish family who came in during the 1840s, 50s, and 60s. The first thing the Irish came in for, they were sent into the war. And if they couldn't buy their way out, they were the real slaves in the North. Grant had a slave. Lee had a slave. I mean, this is absurd. So the distortion of history as articulated by academia was absurd. And that was part of the propaganda that I had to learn in the North and disavow when I came to the South. The South was far more integrated than anybody ever realized. I'm still living here in the rural South, and I have mixed couples at a far greater rate than I see in the North. Robert E. Lee was not only the number one student at West Point, he was, as you said, Alex, the superintendent of West Point. The reason he went into Northern Virginia is because his loyalty was the patrician family in Virginia, not to the South. He eventually agreed to be the head commander of all the South only years after he was in the war. He was a great tactician, but not a great strategist. And in turn, we have Grant, who's portrayed as some kind of alcoholic, who was a brilliant strategist, was an excellent command and control officer, and did exactly what he had to do to fight the war. And he did it, and eventually became president of the United States because Lincoln was afraid that Grant would become the president and try to subordinate him. So the history of all of these dynamics is never articulated because our schools don't teach it, our professors don't want to hear it. And basically, the New York Times has no idea what they're talking about. Neither does the Washington Post. The first people I hear are going to have any ideas, I'll always go to Alex. Now,
all right, folks, we'll be right back with more of the Alex Jones Show. And for the final segment here with Dr. Pieczenik. Dr. Pieczenik, I had one question for you. I've been following your coverage of all of this, and I want to phrase this to the best that I can. You seem to be pretty unfazed by all of this. You seem to think that all of this is pretty menial and that this isn't really the big story. There's something else going on. Is my analysis of your coverage of this accurate?
Yes, you've been, as usually, very sharp, Owen. The reason I'm not fazed by any of this, number one, we don't have a civil war. Number two, Trump understands what's happening. Number three, if you see the man next to him, that's a famous executive producer who really understands what's going on, and really where the distraction is occurring and why this is occurring is that the Democrats have been trying to raise money for Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the Aoun brothers, the Pakistanis, Awan brothers, who are Pakistani thieves and criminals. They should have been arrested. It's a major national security threat, and the money isn't coming into Debbie Wasserman Schultz. She should be indicted, convicted, and sentenced as an enemy of the state. Similarly, the problem occurs with Obama. He has again tried to open up a nonprofit organization. It won't work. Obama was a failure. He was a product of the CIA. His mother was an agent, his grandmother's grandfather. So, again, the agency fails repeatedly, and this is all before Pompeo, who came in, and also the fact that we put military officers into the White House and in other executive positions. We will not have a civil war. The reason for it, as I said before, the Civil War was started for economic reasons. Trump is in no way similar to Abraham Lincoln, who was really Marfan syndrome with major mental problems and severe narcissism. What happened in the Civil War was economic change from...
Dr. Steve Pieczenik, drstevepieczenik.com. We'll be right back with more of the Alex Jones Show.